If you have your Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 2. God's Word is good stuff. We're continuing to talk about being led by fire. And there's something about when you get into God's Word that I find really interesting, because I've read Exodus lots and lots of times in my life as a follower of Christ and just growing up in the church. But there's something about when you read God's Word that there's just new things that you see, new things that you observe. I mean, one of those that really came to mind as I was reading about the life of Moses is the role of women in his life. That Moses would not have survived and would not have been the man that he was had it not been for women in his life. He had a mom that realized that there was something special about him and did what she could to protect him from a world power that wanted to destroy him for being a male, and protected him and kept him alive. He had a sister that watched over him to make sure he was safe while he was being hidden. He had Pharaoh's daughter who betrayed the law of her dad when she found Moses, and she kept him alive. And then when we see Exodus 2, there's a group of girls that see Moses and encounter him, and God uses them in a situation to help him to find family when he's in the midst of the wilderness alone. I mean, women played a big role in his life. I mean, women, you are valuable. And God uses you. I mean, it's awesome when we think about that. But when we look at being led by fire, the camera, so to speak, focuses in on Moses, and it kind of looks at one situation in his life. And really the thought that came to mind, I was looking at it, is the deliverer is grown up. The man that God was going to use to deliver his people is grown up. And really the question comes out, will he be led by fire or will he be led by himself? Who's going to lead him as he leads others? And so Moses grows up. He has a dual identity. He was born a Hebrew, but he grew up an Egyptian. And he had both of those tensions at him. In some ways, I wonder if it's like us. We grow up in the world, but we also maybe grew up as Christians, and you have those dual identities sometimes pulling at you, and he grows up that way. And through his life, he knew who he was as an Egyptian from his training, from his status, from everything that he had, and he knew who he was as a Hebrew because God arranged it that, yes, he was adopted as an infant, that he was raised by his actual birth mother, which is pretty neat how God worked that all out. But here he is, he's growing up and he's experiencing that, and time goes by, and the burden that is there, God planting a burden on his heart for his people, is growing and growing and growing. And he faces a situation now of what's he going to do with that burden? How's he going to act? So it starts in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. One day when Moses had grown up, and in this case, he's probably around 40 years old, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw. Now, the word that was used there for looked on and also saw in Hebrew is yar, Y-A-R. And it means simply to see with emotion. He saw something and it moved him. Because a lot of times we see things and it doesn't affect us at all. We just see it and we go on. Sometimes that happens in my house. We don't see things with the appropriate emotion. Like sometimes there's dishes laying everywhere. When we see them, we don't see them with any emotion. And so then we don't do anything about it. But here he sees with emotion. And what he sees is an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. So there he has that division taking place, this dual identity at him. Will he stand as an Egyptian with the Egyptians, or will he stand as a Hebrew with the Hebrews? Who will he be? And in this instance, it really appears that he wants to try to be both. I want to blend in and yet stand up. I want to stand up and protect, but yet I want to be right in the midst of that. I remember one time there was a girl in a youth group, and she got up and boldly proclaimed to everybody in the church, hey, I really feel like God has called me to go out and reach people in the community. And so she was talking about these outreaches that these parties that she would go to. She's like, I want to share my faith with them. But then in their same breath, she's like, but I also like to hold the beverages that they have and consume them with them as well. It's kind of like, who are you? Are you going to be like them, or are you going to reach them? Who are you going to be? And Moses is like that in this midst. He's standing there in the midst, and he's like, I see that. And so what's he going to do? So he has different ways to approach the situation. He can blow them up. He can cancel them. He can cover it up. He can ignore it, or he can appropriately deal with it. He has a lot of options. So then continuing on in verse 12, he looked this way and that, and seeing no one. So he's like, hey, I'm just going to case the environment. I'm looking everywhere. I don't see anybody. Nobody's paying attention to what's going on, which to me probably meant it was a very routine thing to have an Egyptian beating a Hebrew that nobody even paid attention to it anymore, which is really sad. But so he sees this taking place, and he just decides he struck down the Egyptian, killed him, and buried the body in the sand. Now, if you were to step back till the 1930s, there was an individual named Dale Carnegie. And he was working and living in New York City, and it was just in the mid-30s as the economy was starting to recover from the Great Depression. And so there was a lot of people that were getting jobs, and they were having a lot of tension. Am I going to get laid off? Is my job going to last really long? How do I succeed in life? And so Dale Carnegie wrote a classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And in that book are some tips that he gives on how to win people to your way of thinking. And so it goes something like this. Begin in a friendly way, so be friendly. Make people feel important, remember their name. Begin on common ground. See things from the other person's point of view. Know the value of charm. Be charming in how you talk to them. Kind of win them over. Have a winsome personality and conversation. Be genuinely interested in the other people. Let the other person do a great deal of talking. Do not criticize, condemn, or complain. Be quick to acknowledge your own mistakes. Don't attempt to win an argument. Let the other person feel the idea is his or her own. So those are tips that Dale Carnegie gives on how to win people over to your way of thinking. Get to know who they are. Listen to them. Talk to them. Make them feel important. Make them feel like what they're doing, their change needs to take place. Moses did none of that. We don't know the name of this soldier because he didn't get the name. He didn't talk to him. He didn't dialogue like, hey, why are you doing that? What are you doing? He didn't try to do any type of change. He just walks up behind the guy, whacks him over the head, drops dead, takes the body, buries it. He did nothing to try to win over this individual to his way of thinking. So he's like, I buried the body. I'm like, hey, I pulled the guy up, the Hebrew that had been being beaten. It's like, go home. You're free. Run away. And he's like, look what I did. I set my people free. I did it. I took a stand. I made a point. Man, this is great. And he goes home, thinking, man, I'm a hero. Look what I have accomplished. And he lays down. He probably had the best night's sleep ever that night, thinking, man, this is great. I can let my people free. I'm the hero. Man, tomorrow when I get walking around everybody, they're going to be like, way to go, Moses, you did it, woo! And I'll be like, yeah, I'm the stuff. I'm the hero. He gets up the next day and he finds out that he went from hero to zero extremely fast because he managed to make a mess even messier. Anybody in the house ever make a mess messier? Sometimes I think that could be my spiritual gift sometimes. It's like sometimes I feel like I should just carry a mop with me on sometimes how I can just make a mess messier. It's like sometimes I can even start cleaning my garage or cleaning in the house, and somehow it's even getting messier as I clean. Because I'm like, well, if I'm going to clean this, I might as well clean this, and I'm going to get this out, and I'm going to do all this. And all of a sudden, like, my wife will walk out in the garage and be like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm straightening up the garage. And she's like, how? Because everything is now out instead of away. I'm making a mess messier. How many of y'all have ever just had, like, you should probably put your foot in your mouth as often as your mouth's open, and you're saying things, and you're realizing I'm saying things that I shouldn't be saying? That, man, my Nike tastes really gross because I have my foot in my mouth all the time, making a mess messier. And that's Moses in this moment. He's like, hero to zero really quick. Watch this, verse 13. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? Why are you hitting him? Even though yesterday, I just killed a guy, beat him over the head. But, we're just going to avoid the hypocrisy. Why are you hitting your companion? Why are you guys fighting? You shouldn't be hitting each other. What are you doing? And the man answered, who made you prince and judge over us? Man, you ever said that before? Siblings say that all the time to each other. Who made you my mom? Who made you my dad? Who made you my boss? But don't we have that attitude all the time with everything in our lives? If somebody tells us something we don't like, our response is, who made you boss? Who said you could do what you do? I mean, even Friday, as I was driving down the road, I was going a little bit faster than the speed limit. Not excessively faster, but a little bit faster than the speed limit. And I realized in my mirror, there was an unmarked police car following right behind me. And I'm thinking, uh-oh. And he didn't do anything, just let me. It wasn't like I wasn't excessively speeding. I was just kind of speeding. But then I'm sitting there thinking through all the conversations I'll have with him when he pulls me over. But it's like, don't we want to do that? The cop pulls us over. Like, who said you could pull me over? I'm a taxpayer. You work for me. Try that next time. See how that goes. A friend of mine driving to college, we commuted up to Edwardsville, and he's driving up to college and driving up 255 up to Edwardsville, and he just decides he's just going to speed down the road because everybody speeds on 255. I mean, the speed limit is 255 miles an hour on 255. So he's driving up 255, and if you know anything about 255, there's a lot of police officers that also drive around 255 because in Collinsville is the police headquarters. And so he just decides as he's driving along that there's a slower state trooper driving down the road that was actually driving the speed limit, but my friend was driving 10 or 15 miles over the speed limit, and he just blew right past the police officer. The police officer pulls him over. My friend, being real wise, said to him, well, you guys normally always speed down this road, so I thought I would go the speed limit you guys always use. Needless to say, he did end up with a speeding ticket. And I laugh at him all the time when I see him, because it's still funny to me years later. Who made you prince and judge over me? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? I mean, here it is. Moses thought he got away with something. He looks this way and that. Nobody's paying attention. He buries the body. He's innocent. He's like, whoo, I got away with this. Not thinking through the fact that, hey, the person that you set free is going to talk. Not thinking about the fact that that individual that is no longer alive is going to be missed. He's going to have a commanding officer or some kind of structure with his job wondering, hey, where's Bob? Why is he missing? What's going on? Why is Fred not reporting home? What's going on? He's going to have family members being like, hey, Joe went out to work. Where is he? What's going on? He's gone. Why is he missing? Not thinking through the ramifications of there's going to be people looking for that. Not thinking that, hey, a body buried in the sand might actually pop out of the sand. Not thinking through any of that there's a possibility that there's going to be exposure to all of this. But so then, Moses was afraid and thought, surely this thing is known. When Moses heard it, or when Pharaoh heard it, he sought to kill Moses. I mean, here he is, he's thinking, I did a good deed, but there's that saying, no good deed goes unpunished. Here he's thinking, I did something great to help one person, but not realizing it's now escalating the situation for others. He made a mess messier. Because the Egyptian response would be, hey, one of our own died. We're going to make a lot more of you suffer. We're going to make a lot more of you pay for what happened to that one person. I had an employer one time that whenever he had a problem with one individual, we would go into our desk the next day, and on our desk would be a large piece of paper with memorandum written across the top in the biggest print you could do. And everybody would get in trouble for the sins of one. And he'd be like, really? And sometimes it would be the dumbest things. Like a girl wore shorts to work one day. So then all the guys had to wear pants. We always had to wear pants. But there's this note that says you will wear pants every day to work. It's like, that was never an option for us. Why are we getting this memo? She's the one that broke the rule. Why don't you deal with her? But it was always everybody pay for the sins of one. One person showed up late to work one day. So he's like, everybody needs to be there by your assigned start time. It's like, just deal with the one. But in this case, probably all the Hebrews are going to suffer for the sin of one individual. Made a messier. But yet Moses is in this situation where he's avoiding picking a side. I'm not picking a side. I want to be an Egyptian, and I want to be a Hebrew. I want to be on both sides. And he didn't pick a side, so he made it worse. And then he also acted rashly. And he put everybody in danger of repercussions because of that rashness. Ever acted rashly before? I mean, it happens with a lot of things in our lives. Sometimes we say the things we didn't say because we're acting rashly, and we just word vomit in very harsh ways. Or maybe it's we make a purchase rashly. Ever do that before? You all of a sudden you see something, you want it, and you just purchase it really quick, and then after the fact you're like, what did I do? Why did I do that? I can remember one time my wife and I went to a free vacation in Branson. All we had to do for our free vacation in Branson is sit through a short little seminar about how you need this property. And man, they were working us hard. Like, man, you really want this property. You really want to give us whatever big, large sum of money it is so you can have 2 weeks of vacation right here in one of these beautiful condos here. Or you can trade it for 1 week somewhere else. All you got to do is give us all this money. And man, they are working us hard. And then when we're like, no, why would we do that? They're like, well, let me bring in my manager, and my manager will talk to you. And the manager comes in, they're like, man, you really want to do this. You really want to do this. And all they're like, man, get your wallet out. Give us your credit card. Let's do that. And we're watching people around us do that. They're making these major transactions right there with their credit cards. And we're like, man, they're trying to get you just to act rashly because you're on vacation. You're not thinking like you normally do. Any other time in your life, you're like, well, I would never make a big purchase. You're on vacation. You have vacation brain. You ever get vacation brain? Vacation brain's awesome until you have to get back to reality. But my wife's just like, she's getting aggravated because this little thing's all of a sudden eating a whole afternoon as they're working us, man, because they thought, man, we got somebody here. We got them good. And my wife finally looks at him because we're renting an apartment where we live. And she just looks at him and is like, why would I pay you all this money for 2 weeks in a hotel somewhere when I don't even have my own house yet? And then finally they're like, oh. And then we're like, give us our silver dollars ticket so we can leave, please. But acting rashly, Moses acts rashly, and it made a big mess. I mean, some things we can learn right there is when we really need to be in control, to act wisely, not rashly. Now, in math, if you take 2 negatives and multiply them together, you get a positive. But in life, 2 wrongs do not make a right. Moses killing an individual does not make the situation right. It just makes it messier. Sometimes we need to think before we act. What is the outcome of what I say? What is the outcome of what I do? What's it going to be? Am I out to damage the other person? Am I out to destroy the other person? Or do I want to see life and liberty here? What am I after? What are my motives? I need to choose my words wisely. I need to keep the big picture in mind. By these words that I say, if they take root in the heart of the hearer, what will the crop be from those words? I mean, I'll never forget this student named Danielle. She made a comment to my wife one time, talking to my wife, because she was talking about the frustration that she had with her dad, and she recounted this situation where on a Monday night before youth service, I was just sitting down and talking to her, and I basically communicated to her, you're priceless and irreplaceable. You are valuable. You matter. I just communicated to that as we were having the conversation, and she went home and she had another one of her fights with her dad that night, and they blew up over everything, and she just said to her dad, why can't you be like Pastor Mark? Why can't you speak words of life into me? But a lot of times we don't think about what are the words that I say, what happens when it takes root in their heart, what does that become? Because those words will outlive the conversation by years. So we got to think through how do the words impact things? You have to use appropriate tact, directness, firmness, and love. Yes, that was a situation where Moses needed to use firmness. He needed to use directness of, stop beating that man. He needed directness in that moment, but also some tact. Murder, probably not the best solution. Be godly. Do my words, my actions bring honor to God? Are you with God in what you're doing? And is God with you in what's going on? Am I being light in the world? Am I representing God or am I representing myself? Because sometimes we'll do the right thing in the wrong way. We'll say or do the wrong thing, or we don't say and do the right thing. So I want to make sure that I'm being godly in how I approach the situation. So it's a mess. That mess is bad. So much so that Moses goes from being the top. He's like in the top tier of his society, in the top tier of everything, in the who's who of up-and-coming young leaders. He was probably in that list. He was probably hey, be like Moses at the staff meetings that they had up until that moment. And then he is now running for his life from the world power of the day. Not something that I would ever want to be in that place. Moses didn't either. So he just packs up all his stuff and he heads out of town. Goes into the wilderness. Hey, I'm just going to disappear in the middle of nowhere. I mean, sometimes I have this fantasy, it'd be great just to move up to Alaska to live off the land, because it looks really fun when I watch the Discovery Channel shows on it, where you're just spending an hour watching these people out there, and they're like real ripped because they're like chopping down wood all the time, and then they're out there with their guns or their bows and arrows, and they're hunting animals, and then they're bringing them back, and they're skinning them up, and they're cooking all their food and growing their vegetables. I'm like, man, that looks like so much fun. For an hour to watch on TV, where they're taking weeks of footage and shrinking it down to 42 minutes of TV time, and you're thinking, in reality, I would go there, it would be rough. Because it looks cute when they're walking through 3 feet of snow, when I'm comfortable on my couch in the air condition. It'd probably be different living out there, but every once in a while I have that fantasy. My wife shot me down one day when she said, I'm not moving to Alaska. And then I'm like, well, I choose you over Alaska. But so he heads out into the wilderness, and he's like, hey, I have some distant family out here, the Midianites. Father Abraham had many sons, but he also had another wife, and she had some sons, and so the Midianites came out of that little strain, so they have this common connection of faith to the great I am, and so I'm just going to go out there. Maybe I'll find some safety out there with the Midianites. And the Midianites and the Egyptians didn't really get along, so he's like, hey, I'll head out of town. I'll head that way. So as he's going, he's heading out into the barren wilderness, and he doesn't have GPS. He's just following a road, and he gets out there to the ancient version of Starbucks. He goes to a well. Because wells were the meeting place. It's where everybody went. Wells kept people alive. Robert Comstock's daughter-in-law put on Facebook in the middle of the night last night, whose idea was it to go to Starbucks at 8 p.m.? Because apparently she was up, 6 hours after that, 2 a.m. She was up when she made the post. So anybody here drink caffeine? If I have caffeine after like noon, I will be up late that night. It just affects me that way. But so Starbucks, or the wells were the place everybody went. Everybody goes and visits. Everybody hangs out. All the roads went there. Your animals and your livelihood depending on getting the water. And a lot of times the women had the job of going being the water people. They had to go and take the jugs, take the animals there to get the water, had to go there to get to the well, whatever's taking place. And he just shows up at a well, and he gets to the well, and it's a mess. But he's in the wilderness. It could be a scandal or failure or maybe even God's leading, but sometimes we find ourselves tired, alone, broken, ashamed. We find ourselves in the wilderness. We find ourselves outside of the norm. We find ourselves in a place we didn't expect to be, but a place where we'll grow like never before, because change happens in the wilderness. Wilderness seasons are never easy, but it's when we learn the most. Moses needed his wilderness experience to grow and be refined. He entered in despair and confusion, broken, alone. But he needed the arrogance of being Egyptian royalty stripped away from him. He needed that attitude of, look at all the resources I have that I can call on. The greatest economy, the greatest military force. I can just call on all those things and look who I am as an Egyptian. He needed that stripped away so that he learned to depend on God and God alone. I mean, sometimes God takes us into wilderness experiences because he needs to do some refining in our hearts and in our lives. Those seasons of time in the wilderness are not fun. They're not easy, but they're necessary because it's when we grow deep in our relationships with God. And the best part is they don't last forever. That even when you find yourself in a season where you feel like, man, I'm in the wilderness, man, I'm separated, man, I'm pulled away, it doesn't mean it's forever. It just means it's for right then. So from zero in the wilderness, God starts making a hero. Verse 16, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. Here's the reality about Moses. He had a heart to help the oppressed. That calling, that passion, that desire that God placed in him because he was the man that was to be the deliverer. So that calling, that burden was there. It had been developing for 40 years. It didn't go away when he was in the wilderness. It was just refined. But there he is, and he gets there, and he's at the well, and he sees the problem, and he's like, man, I have to do something to help. I have to act. Now, here it is. He does act rashly again because these shepherds are there and they're just pushing the women away. They're like, hey, we're the guys. Get out of the way. Move out of the way. We're taking over the well right now. They're just pushing themselves into the situation. And here's Moses like, no, they were here. They were here. Get out of the way. So he's there and he's got a heart to intervene for injustice and to right wrongs. He was quick to act alone against the odds. One man, a bunch of shepherds. And a bunch of shepherds are not like accountants that sit in an office where they're just like on a computer all day and they have soft little hands and white little skin because they're not in the sunlight ever and they're just frail. No, these guys were manly men. They were ripped. They worked hard. Their job was to protect their flock from wild animals and from thieves. They weren't people that would mess around. I mean, Moses had definitely an imposing personality and probably an imposing just presence as who he was. God uses who we are. And there's Moses, and he's like, hey, I'm ready for a fight. Let's throw down. I mean, here it is, he's running for his life, and that in the midst, he's like, I see a problem, I'm going to right a wrong, I'm going to fix this situation, and he gets right into it. He's able to chase them off. They left, And then he turns around and he does the chores of 7 women. I don't like to do the chores of my wife. I don't know how she does everything that she does. It amazes me how much that she does. But it's like, here he is, he gets in there and he's like, okay, you just sit there, relax, you sit there, relax, you sit there, relax, you there. And he gets all of them just to relax and he does everything for them. Here it is, he chased everybody off and then he does the chores for them. It's crazy to think about. He was willing to get his hands dirty. He was willing to work. Not only did he help them to chase off the threat, he's like, I'm just going to help you in this situation here. But Moses had the character of a deliverer, but he still needed to be delivered himself. He failed as a deliverer because he thought he could do it with no personal cost and without God's help. But when he recognized that he needed God's help, it transformed his life and his leadership, his ministry, everything. God uses who we are, but refines us for his glory. Moses had to learn. He had to learn how to lead, not just command. He had to learn how to depend on God, not just his military and economic might that was around him. He had to learn to listen to and obey the voice of God. The wilderness perfected all that in his life. It refined who he was. So don't freak out if God places you in a wilderness situation, but allow yourself to thrive in those moments. One of the great things about Moses to realize is that my mistakes do not render my life meaningless. Yeah, he made some mistake. He made a bad mistake. Murdered someone. It's a pretty bad mistake. It's a pretty rough choice. But that did not mean his life was meaningless. And then something to remember about the wilderness is that we do not walk in the wilderness alone. Verse 18, when they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" He's expecting them to be out a long time. There was a lot of work that they had to do. It took time to water the flock, to get those animals all watered and fed and relaxed and everything else. He's expecting them to be a long time. He doesn't know, hey, suddenly somebody came to help them and he's there with them, taking care of the situation, speeding up the process. Why are you home? And then verse 20, it says this, as they explain everything that had happened that day. He said to his daughters, "Then where is this guy? Where is he? Why have you left him at the well? Invite him. Come have dinner. Let's have a barbecue. Let's enjoy the time together. Have him come and relax by the pool. Let's just spend some time together. Let's just hang out together. Let's show some hospitality to the individual." Reuel, his name means friend of God. He shows hospitality. Moses is withdrawn. He's running away. He's running for his life. He's withdrawn from everything. But Reuel shows him friendship, acceptance, love. And Moses does something significant in that moment. He accepts the invitation. He was withdrawn, but not shut down. Had he shut down, he would have missed out on being mentored by Reuel. He would have missed gaining friendships. He would have missed starting a family. He would have missed all of that. Because when we're in the wilderness, when everything's down on top of us, it's easy to say, "I've quit, I'm done, it's over." Why do we do that? Because we want to protect ourselves. I want to protect my heart. I don't want to be hurt anymore. I don't want to go through that anymore. So I'm done. I quit. It's over. I'm not putting myself out there anymore. I'm not taking the risk anymore. I'm not doing it again. I'm done. So we shut down. But in the end, we miss out on the blessing that God has for us in that season. If I shut down, I miss the blessing. If I resist the process, if I resist the process of what God wants to do in my heart, in my life, I prolong or even possibly forfeit the end result. The end of myself is the starting point for trusting and depending on the guidance and the power of God in my life. I mean, Moses had to get to that place where I'm just at the end of me, so that he could turn around and just be like, okay, God, I want all you have for me. God, I'm just done with me, and I'm going all in with you. God, I want to trust you and depend on you. So I'm going to allow everything about my life to be stripped away so that you can rearrange and you can build up who you need me to be. And look what he accomplished when he's just at the end of himself and totally dependent on God. And that took a while. There was a lot that had to be stripped away. There was a lot that had to be changed. There was a lot he had to learn and to be perfected in his life. But at the end of the season, it was worth it. So don't be disappointed when you're in a season that just doesn't make sense to you. Write it out and see what God will do. Because he's at work. But he doesn't leave you alone. And that's the best part. Moses thought he had nothing. Because he literally just had his backpack as he's running out of town. Running for his life. But God doesn't leave him alone. Brings him a mentor. Brings him opportunity for a job. Brings him a family. God takes care of him. It's awesome. And then he just, okay, God, I'm just going to walk through what you have for me in this season. Let's just walk it out. And he was just willing to say, okay, God, I accept the invitation. Okay, God, I accept what you're doing. Okay, God, I'm going to walk through this. And his mind, I really believe, was blown. See, when God takes you through something, it doesn't mean for you to be withdrawn where you shut down and you're all by yourself. That's why we're here, to be here for each other, to interact with one another, to build each other up, to walk through struggles with each other, to be with each other, because there's different individuals at different places in their lives just in our midst. There's some that are walking through wilderness experiences right now, and others are in the place where God has you right now, and you're in those different stages, but we're in this together. You're not to walk through life alone. We're in this together. And the more we can learn to be together, then the more we can accomplish the things that God has for us. And the more we can allow the process to go deep into our hearts and lives so it transforms who we are. Shutting down and withdrawing completely is a dangerous place to be. Because we'll just prolong everything God wants to do or even forfeit it and miss out. But remember, wilderness situations don't last forever, even though they feel like it. For Moses, this wasn't just a little getaway so he could get closer to God. Sometimes those are great little times when we can just withdraw for a few weeks and we can just, this is just me time with God. I'm just having a sabbatical from life for a little bit. And those are great moments that we can have where you can just connect with God. Those are awesome times. But for Moses, this wasn't just a little sabbatical withdrawal for him to be close with God. This was a season of his life in the wilderness so that God could work deep because God had a big plan for his life. But the really interesting thing about all this is that God doesn't put an age limit on anything. In our culture, we put age limits on everything. We're like, hey, if you're under 40, you can run a tech empire. But when you get over 40, we don't even know if we want you anymore. And a friend of mine works for a large corporation, and they're even trying to push out the guys that are turning over 40. He's watching it happen. He's like, here I'm this large corporation, but they're valuing the young and not they're just pushing aside the people with the experience because they make too much money. But it's just, God doesn't put an age limit on things at all. So don't think you can age out of the things that God has for you. It's really a matter of, will I be available? Will I be obedient? Because Moses was 80 when he finally got out of the wilderness. But he had to know how to live in the wilderness because he was going to spend the next third of his life leading people in the wilderness. So allow God to do the work that he wants to do in your heart and life and embrace it. Because I really wonder about Moses, of how, if he would have allowed God to work faster, if that whole process would have been faster. I wonder. I don't know, because I just know the way it is. But let's just go with what we have and allow God to work in our hearts and lives and allow it to do as quick as he can so that we can accomplish the things that he has for us. Stand with me this morning.